Welcome back, everyone. It's just another day in the life as a military wife. And there has been a lot of conversation lately about Title IX. For many of us, it was something that took place before we were born. And as a result, how it came to be and why it was necessary may not be as clear. So what is it? Why is it important? And what's going on with it? Why are people talking about it now? That's what we're going to discuss today. As always, I am your host, Sam Wolf, and you're listening to Life of a Military Wife. So I know you're probably all thinking, hey, Sam, but how does this affect the military? This is Life of a Military Wife. Well, Title IX affects higher education, including everything from kindergarten, all the way up to universities. And the military just happens to have 5 academies or universities of higher education for different branches of the service. And I did look it up. It's 5. I only knew of 3, to be honest, before recording this episode, just to be completely straight with y'all. According to our best approximation, enrollment is around 15,900 across all of those different branches. This is going to apply, everything I'm saying is going to apply from kindergarten to college. So a lot of time when people think about Title IX, I know for most of my life, I thought Title IX was that, sports rule that girls get to be on sports teams. Yeah, no, there's a lot more to it than that. But it's also it was until recently, a lot simpler than that. So let's dig into it. First things first, why do we have it? So background is that, and I want to share this with you guys because I feel like it's important to go to sources. One of the main contributors and writers of the original Title IX amendment, and this is the Title IX amendment is to the Department of, it's basically part of the Civil Rights and Department of Education. I'll get you the exact thing. Here it is. Title IX of the Education Amendment of 1972. See, I told you I'll give you exact titles. All right. So one of the main representatives in charge of getting this passed was Patsy Takamoto Mink. In an interview, June 19th of 2002, she said, I want to say I have a very personal connection with Title IX because while I was waiting to go to medical school in my time, I had written a dozen or more medical schools to seek entry. Each one of them turned me down by saying that they did not admit women to their schools. It came to me as quite a shock that in America, it was not a person's grades, aptitude, test, recommendations that got a person into the career of their choice, but that it had to do with one's gender. So it appalled me. I did not know whether to resign myself to the situation or not. I had finished college. I did not have a place to go. I had no real insight as to what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I got a job at an art academy as an assistant director, and the director told me, don't give up. There is something there for you. You can go to. So this is how I came to Title IX. I was determined that no other woman in this country would ever have to endure the kind of frustration and injustice that I have had to face while I was trying to find my place in this great democracy. I thought that was really powerful when I read that. And so let's just break it down. What exactly is Title IX? Now, Title IX, the initial thing is really, really short, so I can actually read it all to you. The original Title IX states, and now it's the introduction, there's been clarifications on what this means over time, but it's still relatively short and succinct for government policy, or at least it was, and we're getting there, I promise. Okay. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Now, most people will focus on the activities or sports part of that, but it also applies to educational programs being accepted to universities, schools, and whatnot. This is something we keep in mind. It applies from kindergarten to college. This is not just a high school thing. This is not just a collegiate thing. This includes kindergartners, people. And when you're writing something that is so broad sweeping, yeah, you need to be careful where you're going with some of this stuff. And that is where we are going to be going. So, this was passed, and there's a lot of history, and I'm not going to have the time. It would take way too long to read all of the sources, but there's a really great website that breaks down the history of it, and it's Women's Sports Foundation, and it breaks down when the original amendment was put in, when it was signed, all the different things that were added to it, different things that were suggested and then rejected, amendments, alterations, and whatnot. I'm going to skip a lot of that. I'm going to hit on to a few key things. So, in it, there was a provision added, and it's the 3-point rule. The 3-point rule, and let me make sure I'm finding, again, like I said, I like to be specific for y'all. The 3-point rule is right here. Okay. 3-point rule, or the 3-part test, is the other thing. Number one, the number of males and female athletes is substantially proportionate to their respective enrollment. The institution has a history and continuing practice of expanding participation opportunities responsive to the developing interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex. The institution is fully and effectively accommodating the interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex. Now, notice it says underrepresented sex, and it doesn't say females. Initially, again, it does largely affect females, but as college education starts to switch over and there tends to be more women attending college than men, there might be a point in which males are underrepresented at a university and they are the ones in question and no longer females. Now, notice it says sex, it doesn't say gender or gender identity. And that is a change that has been applied more recently. Now, the OCR is the Office of Civil Rights. So this is under the Office of Civil Rights. That's the 3-part test. There was a clarification given to part 3 of the 3-part test because it was considered too vague. This is where it gets a little bit more specific. They need to be doing assessments to figure out these things. Is there an unmet interest in a particular sport? Is there sufficient ability to sustain a team in that sport? And is there a reasonable expectation of competition for that team? And if yes to all 3 questions, then the institute is not fully in compliance if they're not addressing the situation. So there, like I said, over time were guidelines made to help clarify certain things. Another guideline that was put in was a religious exemption was put in. And I want to get back to, yes, it's in the history thing. It was put in that there was a religious exemption that religious institutions would not be required to admit or go against their own standards based on gender stuff. Here's a quick example. For example, if you've got an all Catholic girls' school, they're not going to be required to admit a boy under the original Title IX standards. Or if you have a Christian university, they are not going to be required to put men in females housing or vice versa. That there's those religious exemptions, that religious liberties are being respected. And that was part of the clarifications brought forth with regards to Title IX. And these clarifications and adjustments have been going on for a long while. Then we had some different stuff going up. Back in 2017, they tried to add transgender and change it from sex to gender identity. They tried to change some of the definitions. That didn't hold and got reversed. Then, on President Biden's first day in office, he made an Executive Order 13988, preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, which states all persons should receive equal treatment under the law, no matter their gender identity or sexual orientation. According to this, and then including in regards to Title IX, prohibits the discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, so long as the law does not contain sufficient indications to the contrary. And so they were saying that there was not enough indications to the contrary. Well, there was some pushback on that, so he followed up in March 8th of 2021 with Executive Order 14021, guaranteeing educational environment free of discrimination on the basis of sex, including sexual orientation or gender identity. And this stated an educational environment free from discrimination on the basis of sex, including discrimination in the form of sexual harassment, which encompasses sexual violence and includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And this applied to Title IX. And this is why we started to see a crop up over the last few years of inclusion of biological male individuals presenting as female and insisting upon inclusion in female sports or access to female bathrooms. And this is not an isolated incident. This is something that has been going on for a bit. Most people are familiar with the situation with the Leah Thomas and Riley Gaines controversy and what went on with that. That was at the collegiate level. What happened was University of Pennsylvania insisted that a biological male presenting as a female was allowed onto the female team, swim team. And there was a lot of issues with that. And he was a middling swimmer when he was swimming against men. And when he transitioned to the female team, he started winning right and left. Eventually, he went up against Riley Gaines, who was one of the top ranked swimmers in the nation. The main thing that really struck me hard, and I saw this in an interview, one of his female teammates went to the university and explained that she had been the victim of sexual violence. And because of that, she felt uncomfortable having to change and be in a dressing room with a biological male who still had all of his male reproductive organs. He was undressed in front of her. And I'm saying he because that's the biological gender of this individual. And it's just to help keep things straight. She, the female swimmer, because of this traumatic experience, did not feel comfortable. And the school just told her to suck it up. That was her problem. She could go get counseling. So the other issue at this point was that the University of Pennsylvania was not clarifying to the other schools that they were competing against that there was going to be a biological male with biological male reproductive organs changing in there with the females in front of the females and therefore undressed in front of them. And that a lot of the other female swimmers felt uncomfortable with this. And when they tried to address it, they got told they needed to be quiet. Part of the reason why Title IX exists is so that women had these spaces for themselves. Women's locker rooms were supposed to be for women. Then we get into the next instance. Again, I'm starting off with sports, but we're going to go on to the other applications of this issue. Now, this is a report from, it's from the National Review, and they quote the Daily Mail. This is October 22nd, 2022. A North Carolina high school volleyball athlete suffered a severe injury after a transgender player spiked a ball at her head and the approximate speed was 70 miles an hour, according to the Daily Mail. And this has caused her to receive long term concussion symptoms, including problems with her vision, because of the trauma she experienced to her head and neck. This was a biological male playing on the high school female volleyball team, spiked and hit a female volleyball player with a reported 70 mile per hour ball straight into her head and neck, causing significant medical trauma. Why was he allowed to play on a girls' team? The school board decided that they were not going to play against that school anymore for safety reasons, but they would not specify what the safety concerns were. Then we go to Virginia. And you may or may not be aware of the Virginia situation. School in Loudoun County, a high school in Loudoun County, determined to permit a biological male with still biological reproductive organs to use the female bathroom. And he sexually assaulted, and has been convicted of it, so I can say this, a female student. When the female student's father found out, he was upset. The school called the police on him and had him removed. The student was then just switched to another school. He wasn't punished. Nothing was said. It wasn't reported. Nothing. No one at the new school knew. He then sexually assaulted another student at the second school. The father showed up at the school board meeting and wanted to be able to speak to address why they were sweeping this situation under the rug, and they had him arrested. So when I say that there could be instances like this, I'm not being hypothetical. Now let's get to where we're at now. The Biden administration has already made those changes where they are swapping out sex from the original Title IX wording to mean gender identity, and saying that gender identity means they should be allowed into whatever bathroom they want. What was the context I set up here at the beginning? Remember, Title IX applies from kindergarten to college. Remember, it applies to military academies and kindergartens at the same time. Well, the Biden administration has put together an over 15,000 page rewrite. And you know, I try to do my due diligence. I try to read everything. I will include the link. If you want to read all 15,000 pages, go for it. I'm going to keep reading it. I haven't finished it yet, but I felt like I needed to get this out. In that rewrite, they have made some very specific adjustments, and I want to highlight those adjustments for you first. Now, all-female universities or all-female schools can have places taken away from those girls by biological men or boys who claim to be female or present as female. Scholarships can be taken away. Sports scholarships, opportunities on teams can be taken away. And the inverse is possible as well. Let's say you have an all-girl Catholic school and the boy wants to get in. Well, let's flip that around. Let's say you have an all-boys Catholic school, and I've known a couple of these where I grew up that just getting into that school and graduating from that high school meant you were guaranteed a ticket to an Ivy League school or a top school in the nation, probably with a scholarship, because they were just so well respected and academically rigorous. They had that reputation. Well, now a girl can apply, get in, and potentially take that spot from a boy who's earned it. On top of that, you can now have a cadet, a female cadet at the Air Force Academy, for example, assigned to the same room as a male cadet. And she would have no recourse for complaint. She wouldn't be able to do anything about it. She'd have to share her bedroom with a guy she doesn't know. Those bedrooms are not big, by the way. Let's go one step further. Kindergarten. Kindergarten bathrooms. Guess what? Boys and girls are together now. How do you feel about that? It's what they're pushing. This is what it says. It's not just about sports are bad enough because that's when injuries can happen. But bedrooms, bathrooms, locker rooms, all applies. Scholarships, admission to the university you want, all applies. And then you take it one step further. I want to go over this just for 5 seconds. There is a religious amendment, and that religious amendment was reaffirmed in 2020. The reaffirmation of the regulation pertaining to religious exemption states an educational institution that seeks assurance for an exemption set forth in paragraph A of this section may do so by submitting in writing to the Assistant Secretary a statement by the highest ranking official of the institution identifying the provision of this part that conflicts with the specific tenets of the religious organization. So they had a religious exemption. Not anymore. I've seen a lot of people talking about the effects on scholarships and the effects on bathrooms and dormitories and all that, but no one's talking about the religious exemption that has been removed. So, where do we go from here? As a mom and a military spouse, one of the most important things to me is my kids. And their educational environment matters. The fact that I have daughters and sons, I want my daughters to be able to go to the bathroom in privacy without feeling at risk. I don't want what happened to that unfortunate young woman in Loudoun County, Virginia, to happen to anyone else's daughter. And because of that, we need to make sure that these private places for women and girls are being respected and protected. And so far, from what I've read, that's no longer going to be the case under this administration's version of Title IX. That's where I'm going to leave it today. And I know it's heavy, and I know that's it's not the way I normally start my month. I normally start with some sort of thought, life piece. But I changed it at the last minute because this felt very important. And that's why I did what I did. All of that said, let's try to be the good we want to see in the world. And as always, I am your host, Sam Wolf, and you're listening to Life of a Military Wife.